Good morning. Well, for the most part, I am doing the sermon this morning, but I'm also sharing this space, as you can see, with a few of our youth. And I'm going to tell you why, okay, before we get into all of this. We've been trying a few new things to involve our youth in the worship service up here, and for a pretty important reason. I've seen a crazy statistic that says that 70% of teenagers, okay, 70% leave the church by the 10th grade. Like, that's just crazy. So involving them then in this space is half the battle, right? The other half then is getting you, the congregation, involved in their lives. I've read a lot that says doing these things will help connect them to the church beyond the 10th grade. In fact, the youth ministry pros will tell you that it has very little to do with the youth director or the youth room and a whole lot to do with the congregation's involvement. So really, their eternity depends on you. Just kidding, of course. But thanks for sharing this space with us this morning. That's why we do this. Okay, now let's get into this. Our purpose this morning is to just share a little bit of our experience this past weekend down in LA at the Union Rescue Mission. But more importantly, we want to share with you why we feel called to serve. And in doing so, our hope is that you'll be challenged to serve as well.
Yeah, so Union Rescue Mission is your typical service event. We contributed by preparing and serving food. We went firsthand and talked and learned from the homeless. We had various setup jobs that we accomplished, like setting up chairs and tables. We even played sports with the kids in the gym and played games like Jenga with the adults.
But there's one surprising thing about URM that we loved: the rooftop where we slept and spent our free time.
So we're going on this mission trip, right? And we get there and we're on the streets on Skid Row, all these funky smells, sirens, and so we go off the street into this elevator and we go up and we're on the roof, and as the doors open, we just see the beautiful LA skyline. And you can look over the edge and see tons of homeless people below you in tents, just lying on the concrete, yet we can see the beauty above all of that.
So the rooftop was pretty amazing, but with the beauty, there's a challenge in it. You see, we're up really high, 6, 7 stories, and we're separated from the poverty-stricken streets down below filled with homelessness. And then, once we're done there, we come home back to our convenient and comfortable lives. But the challenge is, do we put our needs and do we put ourselves in a place where we can serve those and be involved with those who may have less than us?
Amen. Hey, as the kids are going to grab a seat right now, and as they do that, in John chapter 13, there's a simple but... Really? Okay, John chapter 13. There's a simple but significant illustration for why we're called to serve, which I'm going to get into in just 1 second. But this thing is significant because in verse 1 of this chapter, John chapter 13, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and it says that he loved them to the very end, which can be translated that he shows us the full extent of his love for us. So this little illustration here is probably something that we should pay attention to. I think it might also be significant because this takes place at the very end of Jesus' earthly ministry. So think about this. If it was the very end of your life, wouldn't you choose to do something pretty important? I mean, if you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do tonight? Any bold people want to answer that? Let's have some interaction. What would you do tonight if this was the very end of your life? Just shout it out.
Hug your kids.
Hug your kids.
Loved ones.
What's that?
Reach out to loved ones.
Reach out to loved ones.
Call my boys. Call my sons.
Call my sons. Okay, these are all pretty important, significant things. Some of us, maybe we're not speaking up because we'd go do something fun, right? But what does Jesus do at the very end of his life? Jesus washes people's feet. Okay, you probably know this story. Jesus is hanging with the disciples and he says that he must wash their feet. But Peter is there, one of the disciples, and he says that he doesn't want Jesus to. I mean, we can understand why, right? I mean, Jesus is the Messiah. You and I, we'd probably do the same thing. But Jesus then says, well, Peter, then you can have nothing to do with me. And Peter, being the overachiever that he is, this is the same Peter that said that he would never deny Jesus, only he was full of it because he did 3 times. So Jesus says to this Peter here, So Peter says to Jesus here, then Jesus, wash all of me. And I can imagine Jesus there, he probably pauses and folds his arms and kind of has this, responds with this dumbfounded look on his face and says, dude, this isn't about you being clean. You've already showered today. You're not that stinky. This is about something else. And then in verse 12, and I'm reading from the Message translation, Jesus says, then he, Jesus, said, do you understand what I have done to you? Apparently not. You address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That is what I am. So if I, the master and teacher, washed your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I've laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do. I'm only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life. I think there's something interesting that transpires here in this passage. See, Jesus, at the beginning of it, he calls us out that we acknowledge him as Lord and Master. Right? It says, you address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That is what I am. I think I have a slide of that up there. Now, think about this. We do address Jesus as master, right? As Lord of our lives. I mean, at least we say that. We fight for Jesus. If we disagree with something that goes against him or the Bible, we stand up for that. I mean, if somebody disagrees with us about who we think Jesus is, it gets nasty. If somebody were to make a movie about who God is and we disagree with it or we're uncomfortable with it, all hell breaks loose on social media. Okay, I'm not going to talk anymore about that. But the point is, yes, we acknowledge Jesus as Lord and Master of our lives. But our behavior after that is maybe what he's calling us out on here. Because what he says next, or how he says it, is interesting. He says this, I have it up on the slides. What I've done, you do. I'm only pointing out the obvious. Okay, now I'm reading into this a little bit here, but his tone seems to be almost parental. And I think so because what he says next is he gives this metaphor that's pretty basic. It's maybe something as a parent you would say to your middle school child if they questioned why they should listen to you. He says this, "A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer." I mean, what's he saying there? I'm the boss. Do what I say, or in this case, do what I do. And then he says what every parent on the planet has said. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it. See, we can fight for Jesus. We can disagree with others until we're blue in the face. We can go to church in our Sunday best. We could even memorize the Bible and so on and so forth. But if we don't get down and dirty and wash each other's feet, then we are missing the whole point. I mean, isn't that what he's saying here? If you don't act like it, you don't get it. And when we miss the point, look what we miss out on. He says, if you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life. There's a twist here. Did you catch it? See, we think serving others is about what happens for them. So we go to Union Rescue Mission and they are fed. Or we go overseas on a missions trip and we build a house and they get a home. But Jesus here seems to say that we are blessed when we serve. And so maybe the question is, do we live a blessed life? I mean, if not, maybe we're working too hard to have our feet washed by those below us. Maybe we've got this whole thing backwards. See, this is why we serve. This is why we go to Union Rescue Mission. By serving others, we not only help them, but we also begin to figure out what it means to live a blessed life. I'm not sure you and I, we really get this quite yet. I mean, the disciples didn't. But I can't think of a better reason to wash someone's stinky feet. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you for just such a simple weekend where we can take some youth and go down and hang out in LA and prepare some meals and hang out with some homeless people that we just don't typically interact with. And God, even though we miss the point over and over, God, may this just be a challenge for us to come face to face with those in our lives, not just the homeless, but those in our day-to-day lives that maybe have less than us, those that we tend to look down on. God, and may we follow your example and serve them by putting their needs before our own. God, in this, may we find the life that you've called us to, a blessed life. Amen.